When a woman is not interested in a man, it rarely shows up as a single clear statement or dramatic moment. More often, it appears through consistent behavior patterns that reveal where her attention, emotional energy, and priorities are actually placed. Attraction is not something people always verbalize directly, so understanding disinterest requires observing actions over time rather than relying on words alone. In modern dating, many men misread politeness, occasional replies, or surface-level friendliness as potential interest. This creates confusion because behavior that is socially acceptable can be mistaken for emotional investment. The reality is that genuine interest and lack of interest often look different when you pay attention to consistency, effort, and emotional engagement. From a stoic perspective, interpretation should be based on patterns, not hope. When you observe repeated signals over time, those signals form a clearer picture than isolated moments of attention or absence. Emotional bias can make people overvalue small positive signs while ignoring larger consistent behaviors that point in another direction. Disinterest is not always harsh or direct. In many cases, it is expressed through distance, reduced communication, lack of curiosity, and minimal emotional involvement. These behaviors are often subtle but consistent when observed without emotional distortion. Understanding these patterns is not about judgment. It is about clarity. When you can accurately read signals, you avoid unnecessary emotional investment in situations that are not aligned. You also make better decisions about where to direct your time, attention, and energy. The following sections break down 7 common behaviors that often indicate when a woman is not genuinely interested in a man. These are not isolated rules, but patterns that appear repeatedly in real-world interactions when emotional interest is absent or minimal. 1. Minimal effort in communication. One of the clearest behavioral indicators that a woman is not interested in a man is minimal effort in communication. This does not refer to a single short reply or a busy day. It refers to a consistent pattern where she contributes the least amount of energy required to keep the conversation alive without adding depth, curiosity, or emotional engagement. In modern dating, communication is often the first place where interest becomes visible. When someone is genuinely interested, there is usually a natural tendency to ask questions, continue dialogue, and maintain flow. When interest is low, communication becomes functional rather than engaging. Messages are answered but not expanded. Conversations are technically maintained but not developed. From a stoic perspective, this pattern is important because it removes emotional ambiguity. The content of the messages matters less than the energy behind them. A woman who is interested will typically show curiosity about your thoughts, experiences, or daily life. She will contribute to the exchange rather than simply respond to it. When interest is absent, replies tend to be short, delayed, and lacking in emotional tone. The interaction feels one-directional, with you providing most of the energy and her responding only enough to acknowledge receipt. Another important detail is consistency. Even if she occasionally replies warmly, the overall pattern remains low effort. Interest is measured over time, not in isolated moments. Many men misinterpret occasional engagement as a sign of potential attraction, but consistent communication style reveals the true level of investment. Minimal effort communication also shows up in how conversations end. A woman who is not interested will rarely extend the interaction or create reasons to continue speaking. The conversation often ends without follow-up questions or attempts to maintain connection. There is no building of momentum. It simply stops when your input stops. This pattern is not necessarily intentional or emotional rejection. It is often a reflection of where attention naturally flows. People invest more energy into interactions that feel meaningful or emotionally rewarding. When that feeling is absent, communication becomes mechanical. Stoic awareness emphasizes observing this without projection. Instead of assuming hidden meaning in small gestures, it focuses on overall behavioral consistency. When communication consistently lacks depth, curiosity, and engagement, it becomes a reliable signal of low interest. Understanding this helps prevent misinterpretation of politeness as emotional investment and allows clearer recognition of where real attention is actually directed in the interaction. 2. Slow or inconsistent replies. Another strong behavioral pattern that often indicates lack of interest is slow or inconsistent replies. This is not about normal delays caused by work, sleep, or daily responsibilities. It refers to a repeated pattern where responses are not only delayed, but also unpredictable in timing, priority, and engagement level. In modern dating dynamics, response time often reflects emotional priority. People tend to respond faster and more consistently to conversations they find meaningful or enjoyable. When interest is low, messages are often placed lower on the mental priority list, which leads to delayed replies without urgency or concern for continuity. From a stoic perspective, this pattern is valuable because it reflects allocation of attention. Time and responsiveness are resources, and people naturally direct those resources toward what feels important to them. When replies are consistently slow without explanation or effort to maintain flow, it often signals that the conversation is not a priority. Inconsistent replies also create a pattern of unpredictability. One message may receive a response after hours, another after days, and another may be answered briefly without continuation. This irregular rhythm prevents conversational momentum from building. When someone is interested, communication tends to have continuity. Even if there are delays, there is usually an attempt to reconnect the thread of conversation. In contrast, lack of interest often results in broken conversational flow where each message exists independently rather than as part of an ongoing interaction. Another important aspect is the emotional tone within replies. Even when responses eventually come, they may lack enthusiasm or emotional engagement. The delay combined with minimal emotional investment creates a pattern of low prioritization. Many men misinterpret delayed responses as being busy or unavailable, but when the pattern is consistent across different situations, it becomes more meaningful. It is the consistency of behavior that reveals interest level, not occasional exceptions. Slow or inconsistent replies also influence how effort is distributed in the interaction. When responses are delayed and brief, it often discourages deeper conversation, which further reinforces distance. Over time, the interaction becomes transactional rather than engaging. Stoic awareness encourages observing these patterns without emotional projection. Instead of assuming hidden reasons, it focuses on what is repeatedly demonstrated through behavior. When communication lacks timing, consistency, and conversational continuity, it becomes a clear indicator that emotional investment is not strong. Recognizing this allows clearer interpretation of where attention naturally flows and prevents misreading passive engagement as active interest. 3. No initiation of contact. Another clear behavioral signal of low interest is when she rarely or never initiates contact. This means you are the one consistently starting conversations, checking in, or creating reasons for interaction, while she responds only after you have made the first move. In modern dating dynamics, initiation is one of the strongest indicators of emotional investment because it reflects voluntary effort rather than passive participation. When someone is genuinely interested, there is a natural desire to connect without being prompted. They think about the other person, share thoughts during the day, or feel inclined to reach out when something reminds them of the interaction. When interest is low, this internal motivation is usually absent. From a Stoic perspective, initiation represents where attention is naturally directed. People initiate communication toward what they value, prioritize, or emotionally engage with. When a woman consistently does not initiate contact, it often shows that the connection is not occupying active mental space. The interaction exists, but only within the boundaries you create. Another important detail is balance. In healthy mutual interest, initiation tends to be shared over time, even if not perfectly equal. There is a natural rhythm where both people contribute to keeping the connection alive. When initiation is one-sided, the dynamic becomes dependent on your effort alone. This creates an imbalance where the interaction continues only because you sustain it. Lack of initiation also affects emotional momentum. Without her initiating, the conversation does not develop organically outside your input. This often leads to a pattern where you feel responsible for maintaining engagement, while she remains reactive rather than proactive. Many men overlook this pattern because they focus on the fact that she responds. However, response is not the same as initiation. Response shows availability. Initiation shows interest. When initiation is absent over a consistent period of time, it becomes a meaningful behavioral pattern rather than a coincidence. Another important aspect is emotional curiosity. People who are interested tend to initiate contact because they are curious about your thoughts, experiences, or presence. When that curiosity is missing, communication becomes limited to responding when addressed, rather than seeking interaction independently. Stoic awareness encourages observing who drives the interaction rather than focusing only on participation within it. When you are always the one initiating, it reveals the direction of emotional energy in the connection. Understanding this pattern helps separate genuine mutual interest from one-sided engagement and provides clarity on where effort is actually being invested within the dynamic. 4. Short and closed responses. Another clear behavioral indicator of low interest is the pattern of short and closed responses during communication. This occurs when her replies are minimal, lacking depth, and designed to end rather than continue the conversation. Instead of expanding on ideas, asking follow-up questions, or sharing additional thoughts, she responds in a way that closes the interaction. In modern dating dynamics, communication style often reflects emotional engagement. When someone is interested, their responses tend to carry momentum. They add context, emotion, or curiosity that keeps the conversation flowing naturally. When interest is low, responses become functional and limited. From a Stoic perspective, this pattern reflects the level of emotional energy invested in the interaction. People naturally put more thought and expression into conversations that matter to them. When interest is absent, communication becomes minimal effort. Short responses such as one-word answers, brief acknowledgments, or simple confirmations often indicate that she is participating without actively engaging. These replies do not contribute to the development of the conversation. They simply acknowledge what was said and end the exchange unless you continue pushing it forward. Closed responses also include answers that provide no opportunity for continuation. For example, when a question is answered without additional detail or without returning a question back, the conversational thread naturally ends. This creates a pattern where you must constantly restart or redirect the interaction to keep it alive. Another important detail is emotional tone. Even when responses are polite, the lack of elaboration or curiosity reduces emotional depth. The conversation feels flat rather than engaging. Many men misinterpret politeness as interest, but politeness alone does not indicate emotional investment. It only indicates social courtesy. The difference becomes clearer when comparing conversations where interest is present versus absent. In interesting communication, responses often feel alive, open, and expanding. In disinterested communication, they feel narrow and terminating. Over time, this pattern creates a dynamic where effort is unevenly distributed. You provide most of the conversational energy, while she provides minimal continuation. Stoic awareness encourages focusing on structure rather than interpretation. Instead of searching for hidden meaning in short replies, it examines the repeated communication pattern. When responses consistently lack depth, curiosity, and continuation, it becomes a reliable indicator that emotional engagement is low. This helps prevent overestimating interest based on basic responsiveness and allows clearer understanding of how much attention is actually being given to the interaction. 5. Lack of curiosity about your life. Another strong behavioral pattern that often signals lack of interest is a noticeable absence of curiosity about your life. This means she does not ask questions about your day, your thoughts, your experiences, or your plans, and she shows little effort to learn more about you beyond surface-level interaction. In modern dating dynamics, curiosity is one of the most direct indicators of emotional engagement. When someone is interested, they naturally want to understand more about the person they are interacting with. They ask follow-up questions, remember details, and show interest in your experiences because they are emotionally invested in knowing you better. When interest is low, that natural curiosity is minimal or completely absent. From a stoic perspective, curiosity reflects where attention is directed. People invest mental energy into what they find meaningful or relevant. When a woman is not asking questions or exploring deeper aspects of your life, it often means the connection is not occupying a significant emotional or mental space. The conversation may still exist, but it remains centered on basic exchange rather than personal discovery. Another important detail is the direction of conversation. In engaged interactions, there is usually balance between sharing and asking. Both sides contribute information and show interest in each other's experiences. When curiosity is lacking, the conversation becomes one-directional or shallow. You may find yourself asking questions, sharing details, and offering insight, while she responds without reciprocating that level of engagement. This creates an imbalance where you are learning about her, but she is not actively learning about you. Lack of curiosity also appears in memory and recall. When someone is interested, they tend to remember details you have shared and reference them later. When interest is low, there is little effort to retain or revisit information about your life. This reinforces the sense that the interaction is not emotionally significant enough to warrant deeper attention. Many men misread general politeness or occasional responses as interest, but curiosity is what separates surface-level interaction from genuine engagement. Without curiosity, communication remains transactional rather than relational. Stoic awareness emphasizes observing this pattern without emotional assumption. Instead of interpreting occasional engagement as hidden interest, it focuses on whether there is a consistent desire to understand your world. When that desire is absent, it becomes a clear behavioral signal that emotional investment is low. Recognizing this helps prevent misinterpretation of basic communication as meaningful connection and provides clarity about where real attention and interest are actually being directed within the interaction. 6. Avoidance of personal or emotional topics. Another behavioral pattern that often indicates lack of interest is avoidance of personal or emotional topics during interaction. This occurs when conversations remain strictly surface level, focused on neutral subjects such as general updates, casual observations, or simple exchanges, while deeper emotional or personal discussion is consistently avoided or redirected. In modern dating dynamics, emotional openness is a key indicator of connection depth. When someone is interested, they gradually become more comfortable sharing personal thoughts, feelings, experiences, and perspectives. They also show willingness to engage when you share your own emotional or personal context. When interest is low, there is often resistance to moving beyond surface-level communication. From a Stoic perspective, this pattern reflects emotional distance rather than intentional rejection. People tend to open up emotionally in proportion to how much they value and trust a connection. When that value or emotional pull is weak, there is less motivation to engage in deeper levels of conversation. The interaction remains functional rather than personal. Another important detail is redirection. When conversations begin to move toward more personal or emotionally meaningful topics, she may shift the subject, respond briefly, or steer the conversation back to lighter themes. This creates a consistent boundary where depth is avoided. Over time, this pattern becomes noticeable because emotional depth never increases despite continued interaction. In healthy mutual interest, emotional topics gradually become more natural and frequent as comfort builds. There is a progressive shift from surface conversation to more meaningful exchange. When this progression does not occur, it suggests that the emotional layer of the connection is not developing. Lack of engagement with emotional topics also limits vulnerability. Vulnerability is often a sign of trust and interest because it involves sharing parts of oneself that are not typically expressed in casual conversation. When vulnerability is absent on her side and emotional topics are consistently avoided, the interaction remains at a controlled and limited level. Many men interpret continued communication as progress, but the depth of communication is more important than its existence. Stoic awareness emphasizes examining what is consistently avoided, not just what is present. When emotional and personal topics are repeatedly absent or redirected, it becomes a clear behavioral indicator that deeper connection is not being developed. This helps distinguish between polite interaction and genuine emotional engagement, allowing for a more accurate understanding of where the relationship actually stands. 7. Effort is not reciprocated. Another clear behavioral pattern that indicates lack of interest is when effort is not reciprocated in the interaction. This means you consistently invest time, attention, planning, and emotional energy into maintaining communication or connection, while she does not match that level of effort in return. In modern dating dynamics, effort is one of the most reliable indicators of emotional investment because it reflects willingness to contribute to the relationship. When someone is genuinely interested, effort tends to be balanced in some form, even if not perfectly equal. They respond with engagement, initiate interaction at times, and contribute to keeping the connection active. When interest is low, effort becomes one-sided, with one person carrying the majority of the interaction. From a Stoic perspective, effort reflects prioritization. People naturally invest energy into what they value. When effort is not reciprocated, it often indicates that the connection is not a priority in her emotional or mental space. This can be seen in various forms, such as you initiating most conversations, planning most interactions, or sustaining emotional momentum while she participates minimally. Another important detail is consistency. Even if she occasionally shows effort, it is often inconsistent and not sustained over time. Real interest is reflected in patterns, not isolated actions. When effort appears only sporadically, it does not change the overall dynamic of imbalance. Lack of reciprocated effort also affects emotional experience within the interaction. Over time, it can create a sense of carrying the connection alone, where engagement depends entirely on your input. This creates an imbalance that becomes more noticeable as time progresses. Many men misinterpret occasional positive behavior as proof of interest, but effort must be viewed as a pattern rather than a moment. Stoic awareness encourages focusing on who is actively contributing to the continuation of the interaction rather than relying on responses alone. When effort is consistently one-sided, it becomes a clear behavioral signal that emotional investment is not mutual. This does not require emotional interpretation or speculation. It is observable through actions over time. Understanding this pattern helps distinguish between genuine mutual engagement and situations where communication exists only because one person is maintaining it. It provides clarity on where energy is being invested and whether that investment is being matched in a meaningful way. In the absence of reciprocated effort, the interaction remains unbalanced, and that imbalance is one of the strongest indicators of low or absent interest in the relationship dynamic. When a woman is not interested in a man, the signs are rarely hidden in dramatic actions. They appear in consistent behavioral patterns that reflect where her attention and emotional energy are truly directed. Minimal effort communication, slow or inconsistent replies, lack of initiation, short responses, absence of curiosity, avoidance of emotional topics, and unreciprocated effort all point toward the same underlying reality, which is low emotional investment. Each of these patterns on its own may seem small or explainable, but when they appear repeatedly together, they form a clear picture of disinterest. Stoic thinking emphasizes observation over assumption, which means focusing on what is consistently demonstrated rather than what is occasionally shown. Human behavior in relationships is best understood through patterns over time, not isolated moments of politeness or temporary engagement. Many misunderstandings in dating come from interpreting availability or basic responsiveness as genuine interest. However, real interest is expressed through effort, curiosity, and emotional engagement that is sustained and mutual. When these elements are missing, the interaction often becomes one-sided, regardless of how polite or friendly it may appear. The purpose of recognizing these patterns is not to judge, but to gain clarity. Clarity allows better decisions about where to invest emotional energy and where not to. When attention is not reciprocated, it is important to observe that reality without distortion or wishful interpretation. Understanding disinterest through behavior, rather than assumption, creates emotional stability and prevents unnecessary attachment to situations that are not aligned. In the end, what matters most is consistency, because consistency reveals truth more clearly than any single action ever can.